In the past years, we have seen a lot of horror developers taking their old franchises and either remaking them, refreshing them, or in some way at least trying to bring them back. Alone in the Dark is the latest in the series of remakes or refreshes of old horror games. We have seen the Resident Evil series have a pretty good success with it, and with Silent Hill remake on the horizon, I was genuinely pleased to see Alone in the Dark starting to get the same treatment, but with a little bit of a spin to it. As this is not a direct remake of the original story. Instead, it takes more inspiration from the original Alone in the Dark trilogy. It does feature familiar characters from the original games, including the two-player characters of Emily Hartwood and Edward Carnby, along with using familiar names and environments. But the story itself is brand new. The game has a nice mix of new and homage to the older games. Like the original, this is a survival horror, though now played with modern controls and camera angles. The environments are atmospheric and nicely detailed, the sound design is overall nice, and the voice acting is alright. But the visuals do start falling a little bit flat when it comes to facial animation, especially both for Emily and Carnby, as they both seem to have a rather stiff and sometimes even a little bit weird animation around their mouth. Their expressions just feel a little bit off. It can be looked past, but I was left with a feeling that something wasn't quite right about them. But like in the original game, you get to pick who you will be playing at the start of the game. While both campaigns are almost identical in the played sections, their cinematics differ quite a bit. Even the cinematics where both characters are present. This leads to the player encountering characters in different places, depending on which campaign they're playing. And having played through both campaigns, I gotta say that Carnby's campaign is better. I found his cinematics more interesting, and I felt like I was getting more answers throughout the game. Not to mention, there are just some really humorous exchanges in his cinematic that are lacking in Emily's. So if you're giving the game a go, I would recommend starting with his campaign for sure. But playing through both campaigns is not much of an issue. My first playthrough with Emily took me approximately 8 to 9 hours, with the reading of things and recording it for Let's Play, which does slow me down a little bit. And that of course included exploring and working on the puzzles. But the puzzles do not change between playthroughs, so I finished Carnby's playthrough in just under 5 hours. The main difference between the two playthroughs is that each one of them get their own unique area in one of the later chapters. In both cases, these reveal part of their history, making it worthy to check out both perspectives. Another reason it's worth checking out both perspectives is that there are multiple endings to the game that are locked behind one character or another, and gathering the different collectibles from both playthroughs. While the game does have a standard ending, throughout the story you can also get the option of ending the campaign early. This being triggered by interacting with certain items or characters after having found the correct set of collectibles. And some of these endings are pretty neat. The gameplay is split into exploration and puzzle solving and combat. A good chunk of the game you're safe from enemies as you're just exploring and puzzle solving, while other times there are enemies around and you have to put those survival horror skills into use. Now early on I felt like the game was doing nothing but feeding me bullets, but it became obvious why when I discovered that some of these enemies seem to eat bullets for breakfast, lunch and dinner. Though having a good aim seems to do more damage, which is good, but it is sadly a skill that I am lacking. But you can also throw various items at enemies and even sneak around them. But when the enemy sees you, they are really quick to try to corner you in, especially if there's more than one enemy. And this can lead to your character getting stuck in place and just pummeled to death, which did bring up the tension quite a bit when there were multiple enemies. But overall I didn't mind the combat, and I found the puzzles to be entertaining. Sadly, the experience was marred by some issues. Most notably, on my first playthrough, Emily just seemed to love getting stuck in the terrain, which got really frustrating, especially when she started doing that during the final boss fight, which honestly really tried my patience. I also had audio issues during the fight, And for some reason, after a few deaths, the game suddenly decided to double up on the breathing audio from Emily, but not syncing it together. And I have no idea why, but when I finally killed the boss, I had two Emilys breathing in my ear, and that was not pleasant. The developers have been patching the game since its release, so hopefully these issues will be sorted with time. And on my playthrough as current B, I did not come across any issues. Now you might note I haven't mentioned the horror. And well, the game isn't very scary. It did startle me a few times and there were some slightly tenser sequences, but overall this is not a very scary game, though it does have its moments. Still, I did enjoy my playthrough, and I found it fine for what it is. I wish the game had gotten to stay in development a little bit longer, so they could have ironed out any issues and maybe improved on the animation a bit. But overall, it's an alright game. Though personally, you might want to wait for a sale before buying it, which also hopefully gives the developer time to fix any issues. But that's just my opinion. Are you interested in playing Alone in the Dark? Have you played it and what did you think about it? Let's talk about it down in the comments, though of course let's keep the spoilers to a minimum for those who have yet to play the game. And while you're down there, do the good YouTube stuff, like liking and subscribing. But in the end, all I wanna say is takk fyrir að horfa og eigðu yndislegan dag.